Okay, first of all, it's really lovely to be back in Melbourne, so thank you for having me. I'm Sarah Mason. I'm the Outreach and Training Fellow at Bodleian Libraries. Now, when you hear Bodleian Libraries, you often probably think of maybe one of these buildings. This is the Radcliffe camera and obviously the original Bodleian Library. But in reality, we're actually made of about 30 different libraries. And in reality, I work in a building that's actually outside of town. It's actually in an industrial park, along a nice river though, so that's okay. And this is actually the building called Osney 1, and it's where most of our digital services are located, such as Bodleian Digital Library Systems and Services, or BDLSS. So yes, Jay, we're full of acronyms, sorry. This is where also the collections management team sits. So we've got cataloging, acquisitions, and our e-legal deposit team. And unfortunately, it's actually quite bare at the moment because it's the middle of winter, so I'm quite glad to be here today in the middle of summer. Okay, so this is what I'm going to cover in the next sort of 20 minutes. Obviously, the project that I'm a part of and where the research for this paper that I'm presenting on today. Also, a bit about the research done, such as looking at the skills frameworks and the specific job descriptions for IT specialists. Then I'm going to discuss kind of what findings and gaps I found, and then going to make some very important recommendations that you can all get involved in. So first, don't know why that it's not reversing. Okay, so it's not reversing, so we're just going to keep talking. Actually, it's not doing. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. So by the way, technology will fail you at any point in time. So digital preservation at Oxford and Cambridge, also known as DPOC, yet another acronym. It's a 2-year collaborative project between Bodleian Libraries and Cambridge University Library. There are 2 fellows at each institution. So we've got policy and planning fellows, we have outreach and training fellows, and we have 2 technical officers. Now, this is funded by the Polonsky Foundation, and it's running from July 2016 until this July. And the reason that they funded this project was they've also funded a number of digitization projects at each of our libraries, and they were starting to worry about the long-term preservation and accessibility of their digital assets. So this project was born. There we go. And so the project outcomes are obviously very specifically tied to the major roles. So the project outcomes are obviously policy and planning, development and implementation, development of expertise and training based on findings from skills audits and community outreach, and specification and implementation of technical tools and workflows that will underpin our digital preservation activities. So what's unique about the approach of this project is that the roles were designed to sort of view digital preservation challenges holistically, rather than assuming that the challenges were merely technical. It also recognizes that getting an out-of-the-box solution is not digital preservation. It addresses the fact that we need to look at the organizational and resourcing issues. They are equally important. For my part in this, it includes recruiting staff with the right skills, training existing staff for new work, and seeing that job descriptions reflect digital preservation activities. So in order to do that, we had to split the project into 2 phases. There's an auditing and an implementation phase. I'm obviously nearing the end of what was originally called the implementation phase, but it's more about trialing and piloting solutions, making recommendations for immediate workflow changes, and making business cases for some longer-term work, because we are well aware that in a very large organization of over 750 staff in 30 buildings, you can't really lead cultural change in 2 years. But the work that I'm going to actually talk about today took place in the auditing phase, and that was about auditing staff skills. And that included, of course, the traditional librarians, archivists, and teams that support them, but also IT specialists that work within BDLSS. And they mainly work on our repository and access services. So it was during this phase that I developed the skills audit survey and interviews, and that's where I found gaps in skills frameworks that when it comes to understanding skills for IT specialists specifically working in digital preservation. So the main research goal was quite simple in the auditing phase. Of course, you start by doing a basic literature review, and that we expanded with my counterpart at Cambridge, looking at existing skills frameworks, and that included ones from professional organizations like SILIP and the Archives and Records Association. Now, what we found when we were reviewing those is they're very specific, of course, to their fields, and they do not adequately reflect digital preservation skills and knowledge. So we looked at a more specific framework that did cover those skills, and that is known as the DigCurV curriculum framework, which I will cover in just a moment. However, when I began scoping my interviewees, we began to realize that we also needed to look at IT specialists because they made up a part of our digital collections and services. So the only way to really do that, in absence of having a good framework for that, we started by looking at job descriptions to see what skills were commonly sought across both librarians and IT specialists, and whether or not DigCurV would actually be suitable for this. And this is DigCurV. Very simple to look at, nice and comprehensive. It's known as the Digital Curator of Vocational Education Europe. It was an EC-funded lifelong learning initiative that ran until 2013. The aim of it was to basically support and extend training for digital curation and preservation staff in libraries, archives, and museums. It's based on 3 lenses, so there's executive, manager, and practitioner, and the practitioner lens is there. And these lenses focus on skills for associated roles that are based on your job responsibilities, not your job title. And there are some progression pathways through them, assuming that you start at hands-on work, then project work, and then moving to strategic planning. Now, the reason it looks so busy is there are about 110 different skills and attributes to it. They're spread across the different lenses, so not all lenses will have 110 skills. They're under 4 categories. You can see knowledge and intellectual abilities, personal qualities, professional conduct, and management and quality assurance. Now, the skills are assigned to different lenses to reflect kind of the expertise required to the role. So you've got obviously awareness, to understanding, to being able to actually do something. And each skill is assigned a unique code or that we call a skill descriptor. So you can see KIA 1.1 and 1.2 up there on the bottom. And we found that it actually made a fairly good basis for skills audits for librarians and archivists and kind of the other more traditional roles, both at Bodleian Libraries and at Cambridge University Library. But so we know that our digital collections are changing the relationship between librarians and IT staff. We need IT specialists because they're often responsible for the development and maintenance of our digital repositories and our Access web applications. Both of these rely on digital preservation principles and activities to support long-term accessibility. And of course, these roles range from developers and software engineers to our sysadmins to the front-end or UX developers and technical analysts. So to get the best out of our digital services, we need IT specialists not only to work with librarians and archivists closely, especially anyone with digital preservation expertise, but they need to have an understanding of the core concepts, tools, and life cycles, and the activities that encompass digital preservation. So, does DigCurV really fit that? Based on my research, I concluded not really. And this is where I turned to then job descriptions, because it helped determine the suitability of DigCurV. So I looked at originally 14 positions, but since the original paper, I've done another 6 for a total of 20. I selected them if they were involved with working in a digital repository, working on the development of web applications for accessing or searching digital materials, in a commercial enterprise, developing digital preservation software, or the job descriptions had some combination of these. So I used them to assess the usefulness of DigCurV, and then I used it for a skills audit framework for staff at BDLSS that were IT. This would help me kind of provide me with information to identify gaps where training would help them receive and be more involved in digital preservation work. So what I found in that assessment was that some sections were quite useful, but that there was a bit missing. So the chart on the screen shows the number of times a DigCurV category was present in essential and desirable broad criteria for each of the job descriptions. Now, some categories showed up multiple times. That's basically because a single selection criterion could contain multiple skills as well. 100% of jobs had some kind of communication requirement. presenting at meetings, writing communications to all staff, managing stakeholder relationships, or very important, communicating technical ideas to a non-technical audience. Information skills, which is in orange, KIA4, was high because of the high number of developer descriptions that involved web applications for accessing and searching digital collections. 45% of jobs listed familiarity or experience with various metadata standards. 36% were involved in having to do training. Resource management was high because many other roles had something to do with project management. And the reason that subject knowledge, obviously the blue one, KIA1, was the highest was not actually just because of previous experience, but for another reason. Basically, it was the only category that explicitly discussed technical skills, but they fall into these three very descriptive categories you can see here. So basically what I had to do is mainly pigeonhole most things into these three categories because there was nothing more granular to work with. And surprisingly, not more of those technical data skills actually related to data skills, which did include things like understanding database structures. Due to the lack of granularity and suitability of the skill descriptors for IT skills, there was a very high subject knowledge count. And that sort of led me to think that it might not be suitable as a skills audit framework. And also we kind of found that some of the selection criterion didn't even map to DigCurV, and they weren't included. And those were things like problem solving, adaptability, and continuous learning or responsibility over their own professional development. So if DigCurV doesn't work, then what might? And this is where we enter with looking at Skills for the Information Age framework, also known as SFIA. Now, this was created by the nonprofit SFIA Foundation in 2003. It's now in version 6. It was intended as a competency framework for people who manage or work in information systems-related roles of any type. So one could conclude that it might be suitable for jobs with a digital preservation component. It's very short, in libraries and archives. So you just saw what it looks like there. It forms the foundation of other worldwide frameworks, including the Chartered Institute for IT, BCS, the Australian Computing Society, and the IEEE. Computer Society uses the framework to define their professional skills and for educational products. So it's actually also used in a number of government organizations for writing job descriptions, such as the National Records of Scotland, and they've discussed whether or not they find this suitable at length to me before. There are 97 skills in 6 categories and 17 subcategories. So like DigCurV, not all skills correspond to every level of responsibility. And instead of 3 lenses, they have 7 levels of responsibility. And like DigCurV, each skill has a unique code and very comprehensive descriptions of the skill and what the skill should look like at each level. Now, when I compared them, there was some overlap when the frameworks were mapped together, but it was rather limited due to the part of DigCurV's generic view of technical skills and then SFIA's very in-depth look at technical skills. There was quite a bit of synchronization with DigCurV's risk management and resource management sections, because that has to do obviously with a lot with disaster recovery and project management. But as you can see in the example, mapping was actually sometimes quite problematic. First, you're looking at it, you see digital forensics and forensic procedures, so you think they must be the same thing, right? But DigCurV, if you look carefully, also mentions analysis of digital objects, meaning looking at the files, validating them, characterizing them, extracting important metadata, and identifying the file format type, not just using forensic methods to preserve the authenticity of the digital object. And if you look at SFIA, SFIA is very concerned about the methods for evidentiary value, and they're mainly concerned with looking at it for legal reasons. And archival principles, when you read it, don't seem to factor into it. So then I went and found digital analysis. When you're trying to match DigCurV with the digital analysis, the skill isn't much better. You would assume it would map well because DigCurV is about analyzing the data after all, but SFIA is slightly different. Analysis has an aim to be used for data modeling, so managing kind of the relationships between the data and real-world entities. It's not really about understanding the risks of caring for a particular file over time, or about anything to do with analyzing a file for preservation planning. On the other hand, DigCurV does not specifically address data modeling. The closest it comes is a related skill that's about database structures and types in KAA 5.3. So there's a bit of mismatch in both of them. So when I compared the frameworks, I found a number of kind of gaps in the frameworks overall. DigCurV is actually really aimed at CEOs, librarians, digital archivists, and research data managers. This is where IT staff, where are they? They're not in here at all. Skills like KA 1.9, apply appropriate technology, are far too general. Even if that's the intention of them, they lack clarity from their definitions as well. So you really don't know what you're talking about, sort of a catch-all. The progression between the lenses is not always quite clear. For example, managers are meant to understand digital curation tools, but practitioners do not. They don't even have to be able to use them, and I think they are the ones usually using them. Lack of skills were found in over 64% of IT specialist job descriptions, which means that additions would need to be made to kind of make it holistic. And it hasn't been updated since 2013. And since the project is over, there are no plans to. Now, SFIA lacks any references to digital preservation and does not acknowledge any of the terminology or go into enough detail around data skills like analyzing, validating, or characterizing file format types, or even preservation planning. While the data management skill that is listed in SFIA does make some references that could align well with digital preservation skills, they refer mainly to the management of in-house, in-use data. There are no references about the management of collected data, which we know is used and managed in different ways than it was originally intended. And this might need to be reflected in standards and processes that make it slightly different to just regular data management. And as Jay mentioned before, digital preservation is a very jargon-heavy field, and it might be that SFIA is lacking in digital preservation terms and concepts because the concepts are more obscure when translated into the language of SFIA, meaning something is lost if we cannot translate it better than we already do. So, I have 4 recommendations. First one, changes to DigCurV. So a 4th lens has been suggested to be added to DigCurV before. Suggestions included IT specialists, but potentially records creators or record keepers. So there is a potential to explore a 4th lens for DigCurV. However, kind of due to the strong overlap in many of the skills, a better proposal might be to add a technical level to each of the lenses. So in this one, I've done some proposed for kind of practitioner technical level changes. And this would actually also offer a progression pathway for librarians who want to move into more IT-focused roles in their digital collections. And as I was looking at job descriptions, I kept finding more repository librarians, repository specialists that were librarian-based roles, but that had more highly technical skills. They had more programming involved. But since DigCurV isn't regularly updated, unless someone wants to take on getting funding for a project, it might not be the most suitable place to explore digital preservation skills for IT specialists. Back to SFIA. It's both commonly used in ICT professional development and in job descriptions, and it is actually updated via public consultation quite regularly. So it would be worth getting more people, such as people in this room, to lobby for inclusion of more digital preservation specific skills and the amendment of some of the current skills to reflect more digital preservation activities. They're currently developing SFIA 7. Comments and change requests are open for review. You can sign up and have your say and make a comment and comment on any of the current change requests. And when you consider that digital preservation is not just a library issue, having more IT staff with digital preservation knowledge will serve places like banks, hospitals, businesses, governments, and many archives as well. Third, improving job descriptions. So many people tell me they cannot take one of my training courses because it's not in their job description and their manager won't release them for it. Conversely, I've heard from some of our software engineers that, don't you do the digital preservation later? Why do we need it in the repository now? And we know that that's not true. They have an active stake in it as well. And actually, we do need digital preservation activities to work within our repository services. 60% of the job adverts that I did look at included digital preservation somewhere in the job description. Only 20% mention it in any form of selection criteria, or in job responsibilities. It rises to 30% if you look at ones that maybe mention skills that are heavily related to digital preservation, such as perhaps fixity or digital forensics or something like that. Job descriptions that do not adequately reflect digital preservation in selection criteria mean that those skills will not be recruited for, or they won't be trained for. If it's not even mentioned in, say, job responsibilities and not even in selection criteria, then they're unlikely to receive training, and they're unlikely to consider it their actual responsibility. And this is why developers and senior IT staff to do something like turn off checksumming in your digital repository. It's because they don't see it as important, and they don't care about it more than they care about the speed of their service. But we know that that does matter, because checksums are how we can prove our files remain unchanged, so we need them. And job descriptions are, of course, how we can recruit for these skills and how we can train for them if we're lacking. And lastly, higher education courses. So as IT specialists and librarians work closer and closer together, we could aim to build these links earlier on in higher education to prepare the entire workforce for preserving the output of our digital world. So as librarians, we know we're not the only ones who need to be responsible for that. So we could do things like computer science courses could contain a module on digital preservation in libraries, archives, businesses, and government. Librarian courses could move away from foundational digital environment courses that teaches things like Web 2.0 and things that have more introductory computer science concepts, and more hands-on instruction would also be beneficial. Now, some courses are moving in this direction, but I think we need to advocate further and get professional bodies involved. In many cases, info management courses are already in IT departments in universities, so perhaps there would be a chance for having greater mixing student involvement. The sooner that we have computer science students and librarian students working together to build a common language, the better for our digital libraries and digital preservation in general, and the better for our digital collections. So I've got some questions for you to take away. How do you think we can give IT specialists the necessary skills to ready them for digital preservation activities? And how do you think we can give librarians the IT skills for digital preservation? Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. Again, we've got a few minutes for questions. If there's any from the audience, just again, come up to the microphones and introduce yourself with your name and your organisation. Maybe someone has an answer to some of the questions previously. Maybe to get us started, you sort of suggested that some cross-disciplinary training between IT and the library world could be a possible solution to these skills gaps that you've just identified. I was wondering sort of why you think those gaps exist. Like, is there a cultural thing that IT people just don't think about preservation in the way that librarians do? And is that something that needs to be overcome? And vice versa, you know, it might go both ways.
It's a language thing, absolutely. We've talked about it before. Digital preservation is highly jargon-based, and I think when we were talking with developers, there's even just sort of a mismatch in terms. We talk about migration to them, and they're like, oh, they think migrating files from, old hardware to new hardware, that's what they think of. But we're talking about file format migration. So we're talking about taking one file format and turning it to another file format. So we're talking about two different things for probably about 30 minutes in this meeting before we realized we were talking about different things. And we said, whoa, this is what you mean? Yes, this is what we mean? Okay, why don't we use a different term? So we now call it file format conversion, but then we have to tell them when they read externally that it might still be called migration. So it's really coming up to the fact that our languages are slightly different. Yep. Like a lot of times we talk about sustainability quite a bit, and that can mean digital preservation in some ways, but not quite, but it is more common to be seen in like computer science than here.
Hi, my name's Kylie Percival from the University of Adelaide. Thank you for the paper. I actually think it's a really important interface between different professions, and it's a critical one for us in terms of longer term results. I'm professionally an archivist, first and foremost, and so, I have some passion around this. So I think often we're speaking to each other, great, we've got to take the conversation elsewhere. So I'd be interested in, any comments you've got from the UK about how that conversation is happening and more widely, professional, with either in associations or elsewhere.
Well, as far as other associations go, we obviously use the Digital Preservation Coalition quite heavily, and that is made up of quite a few, obviously, traditional librarians and archivists, but we actually have people who represent IT and the infrastructure teams in those organizations, so more traditional organizations, but we have banks, we have other businesses like Unilever. So it's really good because we can kind of get quite an interesting group together to talk. The other thing that we find is just embedding sort of technical people in our organization to talk about digital preservation. Our technical officer had no knowledge of digital preservation when he started, and so he learned. Now he's really good at talking to kind of both our developers, but then he goes out with the other guy from Cambridge, and they go and talk quite a bit about this stuff to other kind of more professional software developer groups. So they kind of try and embed themselves in non-traditional areas and have this conversation. So that's quite a good way to send them out to those kind of places.
Catherine Greenhill, I teach at one of the universities. How would you suggest we sneak this type of thing into the curriculum? Because if one looks at the job descriptions, as you say, they're not there. It's crucial, and I think it's more important than our profession is actually reflecting in what we're doing, and we need to do a hell of a lot more. However, as teachers, we respond to the profession, and we have to drop something. And what I want to do is actually, what would you couple it on with in order to actually say, okay, these are the skills you need, or to make it more generic as a skill that people need, if that makes sense?
I'm not sure that I would exactly have the answer, but I do know of some clever people working, and there's clever people working in the US that have obviously, their courses they're changing quite a bit. But in the UK, like the University of Glasgow, they have quite a good information management course. And the way they've done it is they've brought in someone who has a computer science PhD and who also really cares about digital preservation. So I'm happy to put you in contact with her if you want to ask more about how she's kind of filtered that into her courses.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. I really enjoyed your talk and your paper. I'm Robin Phua from State Library of New South Wales. In technology in New South Wales, we do use the SFIA skills, and in the library where I'm in the intersection between technology and library, our manager roles do have SFIA skills. I'm going to chuck a potentially incendiary question, and I'll put you in the spotlight. But I think it's a pragmatic question. Is it easier to train technology IT specialists with archivist perspective and skills, or is it easier to train the other way around, archivists with IT skills, to have IT skills? Thank you.
No. This is a question we posed at PASIG in 2016. Also another good group where you get the intersection between technical people and librarians and archivists. So that's a really good conference. Sometimes I think it depends on the person. I think that teaching digital preservation to IT might be somewhat easier, but then if you come across people who aren't willing to change, then you might have better luck with librarians. I think it comes down to, are they willing to learn and how quickly they'll learn?
I'm Katie Hayden. I'm from the Australian Government Solicitor. I don't have a question. I actually have a challenge for everybody on the floor. We did have an IT-based university degree until about 2 years ago. Edith Cowan was the only library degree that was in information science that actually had an IT specialisation until nobody wanted to do it anymore. So my challenge to everybody is that you should be lobbying your professional bodies, not necessarily to sneak it into the curriculum, but to make it a permanent part of the curriculum. Because at the moment, we only have about 1,000 people who were joint qualified as Australian Computer Society and ALIA professionally accredited people. So this is something that we did have, but we no longer have. And it's a tragedy, really, because that's where we need to be going. So have a think about that and try and actually get these sort of things into the curriculum permanently.
I'll add to that because I had just another thought about the previous question as well, in that I think we can't do away with librarian roles either in the IT world. They have a lot of specialist skills and knowledge. We've talked about copyright. We've talked about kind of dealing with those complex questions. That's what those are skills we have down. Those are skills we're grappling with. Adding technology to that is also really important.
Yeah.
So as a librarian who's married to an IT guy, yes, I think there is a problem with language. I would definitely...
Yep.
Oh, well, we get on very well. But yes, I think because my husband will be talking about is backups, risk management, those sorts of things. That's what IT guys are talking about when they're talking about their databases and making sure that, yes, you can access that data from a week ago or from a year ago or from 5 years ago, that, maybe that tape mechanism that you're still using as your backup, can you actually read it anymore?
Yeah, do they test it? That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. And in fact, to follow on from Catherine's comment, I would actually argue that digital preservation is becoming a life skill, because we're all in the digital world, and if we want to be able to access something, or the digital photo that we took 10 years ago, these are all the things we have to think about.
Yep.
So thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with all of that. I'm married to a climate scientist, so he did a lot of programming, and we constantly struggle to discuss research data and the longevity of that, and why does it even matter? We could just do it again, maybe.
Got time for maybe one more short one, if someone else out there has another question. If not, I'd like to thank you, Sarah, for joining us, and yeah, it was a great talk. And